Peter and Paul's feast doesn't always fall on a Sunday, very, very seldom. And so we don't get to celebrate this day as often together as we might. I'm sure the first thing that comes to our minds when we think of Peter is we think of the present Pope, Francis, because he is 266th in line as bishop of that city, although I'm sure Peter's way of life in that city was radically different from the popes in recent years, because things develop, history evolves, institutions grow, sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. But nevertheless, he is the successor of Peter. Peter, of course, before that, he was the bishop of Antioch, according to the scriptures, or what we would call the bishop, the elder in the town, the head of the Christian community. But he eventually arrived in Rome, and it was from there that his influence and his successors began to influence the church. We often call him the vicar of Christ, or the head of the church. But I think we have to continually remind ourselves that the head of the church came from a town in Galilee called Nazareth. The Pope is not the head of the church. Christ is the head of the church. And we also have to remind ourselves that he is not the leader of the whole church. He's primarily the bishop of one part of the church called the City of Rome. And what I like about our present Holy Father is that he always styles himself the Bishop of Rome. And he goes out and does confirmations and hears confessions and does all those things that model what a bishop should do. Over the centuries, of course, the Bishop of Rome became a temporal ruler. 150 years ago, the whole center part of Italy was the land of the Pope. And before that, centuries before that, the Pope used to defend that property on horseback with a sword. The whole image of the papacy has changed and evolved over the centuries. That land is gone, I think, thankfully. And so that part of the papacy has disappeared. And I think we're on the cusp of a new way of expressing the ministry of Peter through the Bishop of Rome. The man who's there now seems to be doing it in a way which would conform to what Jesus promised Peter, this loosing. We've concentrated on binding for a long time. This man seems to be in a ministry of loosening, of forgiveness, of mercy, of understanding, of pulling people into Christ instead of constricting, making rules about being of Christ. But for us, and I think we have to remember this, the church isn't the Vatican. It isn't the Pope. As Tip O'Neill said, all politics is local, all religion is local. We are Christians right here, in this place, in your family, in your parish, in this diocese. That's where our faith, our religion, our allegiance to Jesus is primarily exercised, and it's wonderful to have models like Pope Francis. But they are models because we don't belong to the Diocese of Rome. We belong here where God has placed us. Nevertheless, because he is such a powerful model, we have to do what the first Christians were doing when Peter was in jail. We have to pray for him. We have to pray that he will succeed in influencing all of us in the way of Christ, because that is really what we believe he is. He's an influence and a model and a guide for us in walking the Christian path, the path of the Messiah. And I think he would agree with this. It wasn't until 6 centuries after Jesus that some pope, a monk, finally began to style himself as the servant of the servants of God. And I think this man really has taken that as his model. He is there for us, and we need to be there for him by obeying the model and by praying. especially for his health and longevity.